Okay, so I'm going to give a slightly different story this afternoon. I thank Guillaume for the great foundational talk. And it's funny, he ended his talk with this cartoon and with the tagline underneath that said, "It is that easy." And it is becoming that easy. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember back in the days where, we had this revelation that we were going to HTML tag everything. Then XML came along and said, oh yeah, we're going to get the editors, they're going to tag the product names in the XML, and they're going to tag people names and all that. Well, they never really did that, right? All we do with the tagging is we tag the metadata at the top of the article and then do paragraph tags and whatnot, and not real content enrichment tags. And I think the exciting thing that's happening now is that this whole science of computational linguistics is moving along and evolving into a science where the machine is not accurate. There is some human involvement, I think, that's still involved in ensuring quality, but I'm really lit up by just what I'm seeing at the university level and what's happening in linguistics departments and the merger between that science and computer science. If you have kids who are getting ready to go to college, major in computer science and minor in linguistics, bring them together, because this world, we're swimming in data. And I like to say, I operate this platform called IEEE Explore, and I get the business people every day, coming up with a dozen features. And I always come back and say, it's about two things, guys. Keep the site running, keep it lit up. But number two, it's about search and finding answers to your questions really, really quickly. Rena mentioned that I'm on the STM Futures Lab, and every year STM Futures Lab tries to identify trends, for the coming year or the coming 18 months. And one of the trends that we identified last December was this whole concept of moving from validation to augmentation, right? So in the past, we'd really focused on peer review and the quality of the actual content. And I think we've got that down pretty well. Where we're moving now is this whole augmentation of the articles and making them more rich and more relevant to users. And Guillaume again alluded to that. So this is IEEE Explore. IEEE likes to say that we publish about 30% of the world's literature in electrical engineering and computer science. We currently have 3.5 million articles in the database, and we sell, like many of you do, we sell access to this to academic and corporate libraries throughout the world. And again, we're always searching for ways to make that service better and improve our value proposition to the users. So we're really focusing on content enrichment right now, and we like to say we want to help users find answers to their questions. We want to enhance those search results. We want to enhance the browse experience. So it's all about picking things out of the articles and creating facets. We want to identify similarities between the documents. Like, we want to be able to say, you're reading this, you might also like to read that. Guillaume again pointed out, and I'll talk to you about how we're doing that. We're also, I think, we're trying to develop vocabularies in common and consistent language for authors, researchers, to enhance online discovery. And I'll talk to you about our efforts at building the IEEE taxonomy and thesaurus. And lastly, I think that whether one could argue that this augmentation is really adding value, I think there's no question that it's table stakes to stay competitive. There's almost, an arms race, I think, that we're all engaged in coming up with more features that we can go out when it's renewal season and say, hey, this year we're doing better recommendations this year, or this year we've developed some new facets for our users. So I think for all of these reasons, it's important to heed Guillaume's advice, and that's thinking about return on investment. And sometimes that return is difficult to measure. One measure may be that you haven't lost any more customers this year. So on IEEE Explore, we use a search engine called Endeca that was bought by Oracle a few years ago, and Endeca had this great concept called guided navigation, right? So what that means is a user puts a term into a search box, they type in RFID antenna, for example, and get out of IEEE Explorer 13,000 answers, right? 13,000 results. Well, what we've done is built navigation tab on the side of IEEE Explorer that shows facets that we actually pull out of the tagged metadata. So this is not machine-generated facets, that actual tags that are created when content comes in from the authors, it goes overseas, and the overseas taggers then send us back metadata files along with a fully tagged XML file. So we have facets on publication type, and what does that mean? It's, are you looking for something in a conference or a journal or an IEEE standard or a book, the pub title, authors. We just went through an exercise of disambiguating 10 million author names and boiling that down to 6 million unique author profiles so that it makes our author search actually more direct. I'd be happy to talk to any of you offline about that effort. It was really very, very painful.
That deserves a round of applause right there.
Conference locations, another facet, and of course data publication and the institution where that work was done. And I think that's another area where we probably as an industry can begin to work together to get some normalization of industry names, of institutional names, right? So is it GA period TECH period for Georgia Tech? Is it Georgia Inst Tech? Coming up with some standardized names so that when people are searching for institutions, they become accustomed to a common vocabulary. These are, again, the facets that are all expandable. So I did my search up the top here for RFID. I got back 9,267 results, and I can then just click on any of those arrows over there and say, okay, I'm going to look at the authors and see, I know this person at Georgia Tech did some great stuff on RFID, and you begin immediately to narrow those those results down. This is pretty standard stuff, and I think most of us are actually doing this. Where I'm going in this talk later is building more facets, not simply out of the metadata where these are coming from, but building facets using some content enrichment software. So I'm going to switch gears for a minute and talk about the creation of IEEE's taxonomy and thesaurus. This is a book that's always been near and dear to my heart, still is. I think I've been using it since I'm 8 years old, and it's wonderful to even go back to it today, to look to see how a company or someone's managing this thesaurus of the human language in many different languages. And building a thesaurus is all about coming up with terms and then high-level terms and then creating related synonyms around those basic terms, and it's no different in different technology fields. So we have a number of thesauri on the IEEE Explorer database. We have our own IEEE taxonomy and thesaurus. We use a taxonomy and thesaurus provided by INSPEC. INSPEC is the organization that is owned by the former IEEE in England. Now it's the IET. And INSPEC is a wonderfully large thesaurus. INSPEC actually is a database of abstracts that is sold by subscription to major libraries of millions and millions of articles across disciplines, across the disciplines of physics, chemistry, and engineering. They've had their taxonomy together for, I think, about 30 years or so, and I'll talk a bit about some of the features of that. And then the third thing that we use are author-provided key terms. And I'll explain to you how we actually use those terms to enhance our own taxonomy and thesaurus on an annual basis. So the INSPEC thesaurus is quite impressive. 18,775 terms. So if you think thesaurus, think of reading this thing, and in bold type there are 9,722 preferred terms or controlled indexing terms, and then there are 9,033 synonyms related to those 9,722 top-level terms. That's a pretty substantial thesaurus in taxonomy. INSPEC actually has a very large worldwide operation where they're constantly analyzing new trends in the language used in engineering and physics and chemistry, and update that thesaurus every year. And they do some great things, like they'll even, in the records that are sent back from INSPEC, they'll actually indicate if a term's been deprecated or used, formerly was, great example is this. Everyone's using the term wireless nowadays, right? But back in 1962, 1963, it was microwave, right? So any of those 62 articles, 1962 and early 60s articles that have microwave now have the word wireless associated with them. So it's pretty neat to do that, watch that historical change in the language. INSPEC provides an ongoing indexing service to us for free. So every week, as we pump out 5,000 articles, we FTP metadata and PDF over to INSPEC, who then send that out to their operations both overseas and in England. They use both machine-aided indexing and human oversight to assign INSPEC classifications to those records. We get them back and inject them back into IEEE Explore, and it happens pretty much in a matter of days. It's really speed is really not an issue right now, but users are accustomed to the INSPEC vocabulary. Like I say, if you're a chemist or a physicist or an electrical engineer, you probably grew up using that vocabulary from the time that you were a freshman in college. So we're still, despite the fact that this is a fee service, we're still sort of married to them. It's quite expensive, but again, it's one of those value-added services that I think if we took it away, we'd get some pushback from our customers. So IEEE said, we think we can do our area of the science a little bit better in 2010. We always like to take on big projects. We saw some deficiencies in the INSPEC thesaurus, got complaints from the computer science side of IEEE. So we hired a company in New Mexico called Access Innovations, Margie Halava. I don't know if Margie's in the room today. I've seen her here at the conference. So we hired them to develop the IEEE taxonomy and thesaurus. And I'd say the whole effort took about 6 to 9 months, and it consisted of us sending all of our metadata and PDF out to Margie's operation in New Mexico, and they crunched it through their systems and identified key terms in all of those articles using, again, some combination of machine-aided indexing and human review of the articles. The construction of our thesaurus is based on a NISO standard, the guidelines for construction, format, and management of monolingual controlled vocabularies, which is a mouthful. But actually, I have a URL to this at the end of my presentation. It's really great. Even if you're not thinking about building your own thesaurus, go to the NISO standard and just read it. It's really neat just to understand some of the concepts behind thesaurus building. I get excited about stuff like this. I don't know about you, but it's kind of cool. It is better nighttime reading. It's better spending your time than watching The Voice or some of those television programs that are popular these days. Believe me, we get a lot more out of it. So anyway, this thesaurus creation took about 6 to 9 months. It was rather costly. But now we think that it's paying some dividends. So you can see this is actually an abstract record of an article. Further up is the actual title and the abstract. But we actually show all these controlled terms, which I think is a little bit of overkill. But we see the INSPEC controlled indexing terms and then the INSPEC non-controlled indexing terms. These are more like synonyms, whatever. And then we have the IEEE terms, and all of those are hot linked, so when a user clicks on any of those, The search is not on that literal broadband antennas under the IEEE terms, but it's under broadband antennas as an IEEE term. So and it only brings back those particular records. You can see the author, and we have the author keywords here. What we do with the author keywords is we actually use those and analyze those at the end of the year, well, more than the end of the year, but as the year goes on to see if there are any trends building and should we make any additions to our own thesaurus. I think these are pretty, we hot link these, but I think they're a lot less reliable than these because an author, keywords, pulls keywords out, and there may be a lot of one-offs there that don't reveal a whole lot of results. I can't tell you, I wish I had brought the stats, and for any of you who are interested, you can I'll give you my card just to see what kind of activity we get on these. My suspicion is it's not very high on the linking. So as I said earlier, people come into our site, they do a search. Many people just machine process, they'll machine download 2,000 results and go off and do their own analysis on the papers. But I'm curious myself of what those numbers are on the click-throughs on these sorts of terms. So again, just going back on what the effort was for our thesaurus, Access Innovations analyzed the nouns and the verbs and the noun phrases, et cetera, in the 3 million articles. It resulted in topics and descriptors and near terms and synonyms, and they assigned the terms to each article. And now, on an ongoing basis, they also sent us a rule set, and on an ongoing basis now, we have internal librarians. We have 2 MLS librarians in our indexing department who will now run the software. So Access Innovations is out of the picture. We use their software in our workflow as the new articles come in and are assigned key terms. Our indexers can't possibly check 5,000 articles per week. They don't. They check a percentage of those. And if they see anything weird in an assignment of a concept, for example, one of our terms is gold. Gold as an alloy, as a metal, it's a conductor. An article may have a phrase in it called gold standard and be tagged with that word gold. Well, the indexer will say, okay, I'm going to add a rule to the software that says if you see gold as applied to gold standard, ignore and don't tag. It's a very simple example, but those are the kinds of things that the indexers look for. So they update those rules files. So you can see, I said we have 2 indexers on staff. They do lots of other things. I'd say each of them spend about 50% of their time. So do the arithmetic, right? It's a one-man year, one-person year for updating these rules files. What we also do with the matching, what we'll do is we'll take thesaurus terms and we use that for our recommendation engine. So if, for example, we'll say if we have 2 articles and they share 6 terms or more in common, then they must be related. So I like to call it a poor man's way of doing article recommendation, and we think there's better ways of doing it through more machine-aided software, but it works for now. One of the tests, or rather one of the measures might be, one way that we can measure that, I think, is by having a person click on a recommended article and then posing a question. Was this recommendation helpful? Amazon does that, and trying to get some sense of whether or not our recommendations are working. And I would recommend if you introduce any of these recommender systems, you should probably try to get that end user feedback. So our thesaurus work doesn't end there. We actually have a review board of 11 engineers that represent several disciplines. And every year our indexes will, every quarter, they convene that board, usually by teleconference, and the librarians will say, okay, we're seeing some trends and some new words. Should we add terms to the thesaurus? And every year we release our thesaurus with a date. So we're running on the 2013 version, and come the end of December, we'll put out the 2014 version. Okay, so I think that the assignment of key terms, the way that we do it through through the current software that we're using is okay, but we're always asking, is there a better way? As I mentioned earlier, I think linguistic analysis is a maturing field. We're beginning to put more faith in the software, I think there are products like Temis. There are Access Innovations has other products as well. I think what's happening too, we're seeing many of the text processing companies overseas, offshore, are offering text mining as a service as well. So I think there are a lot of choices that we can make to evolve the way that we assign thesaurus terms to articles. I think it really helps. I'll say, Kathleen, yes, you need a thesaurus. You need a taxonomy to do this stuff. And I think one thing Guillaume didn't mention is the looks of community, where I think Temis is trying to build a community of users, and if you have a particular what they call skill cartridge or thesaurus informed skill cartridge that you can begin to share, of course on the terms set by the publisher, but I think it's really incumbent upon us to, if you build a thesaurus, I would encourage you to share it under some license agreement. It may not be for a fee, but at least it's under some agreement to get to ensure some feedback and try to build some community around that. So beyond the simple assignment of thesaurus terms, so we're trying to change the methods for doing that because I think it's getting too expensive for us. We want to employ some analysis to mine new data for enhanced search factors, which Guillaume mentioned. So it's finding product names in our articles, people names mentioned in the articles outside of the authors, and company names. And then other things like, I had a request the other week from an engineer. I'm doing a search on AC motors, and I want AC motors with certain, just do research on AC motors with a certain voltage. Can you actually pick that out of the text? Can you mine that out of the text? I think when we think about it, there are just multitudes of use cases that we can think of to apply the software to. These three that I mentioned here, I think, are no-brainers. We get these requests all the time from customers. For example, I had a person doing some research on RFID tags, right? So he said, the one company that's doing great stuff on RFID is Walmart. So, it would be great if you guys could pull out every article real easily that, had Walmart in the context of their RFID warehousing systems. So, I think this is one of the first uses of machine-aided indexing that we'll employ, hopefully, before the end of this year. And then to employ linguistic analysis to identify similar articles. So getting beyond that keyword set matching and trying to do a deeper analysis of the articles through the software to improve our recommendations. So what are the considerations, right? And everything that we do is cost, quality, and speed. We have to evaluate our text enrichment choices, and that's the process the IEEE is going through right now. We're looking at off-the-shelf software. We are looking at Guillaume's product. We're looking at a number of other products, and we're looking at software as a service products overseas with some of our text creation vendors. As I'm going through this process, I'm saying, is text enrichment becoming a commodity? I think, as I opened with, this is a rapidly evolving science. I think, we probably will. It would surprise me if we didn't see more vendors on the horizon in the next year in this space. I think it's, it's a growing need for civilization, and it's an opportunity for many people to test new ideas. Look at the cost of operations, right, and things that we're considering. The software purchase. We need to, amortize the cost of the initial license. Integration cost. None of the software is out of the box. It doesn't come, you don't plug it in and let it fly on your content. You need to, put workflows in place. You probably need to have at least one or two experts in the software to ensure that it runs well. And sometimes you can do this with the vendor through the professional services units, but you have to pay for that as well. I would recommend to try to build some in-house expertise to handle any software operation that you put into place. Are there new internal skills needed? Certainly to run the software, but I think I'm actually thinking about hiring somebody called a data scientist, or apologies to the classic library science folks, and we have two great ones on board at the IEEE, but looking for maybe someone with some computational linguistics background to bring aboard to help us realize some further potential out of the software. So it's just some things that we're thinking about.
Well, the librarians can learn that,
I know they can. No offense intended. Okay, so I'll end by just suggesting some further reading, and just to get a flavor of what we've done, we can mail these, I guess, URLs to you folks if you're interested, or I could, I don't know how the slides will be available, but the IEEE thesaurus, and access to it is free. It's available from the IEEE page that I've listed here. You just have to list your name and your company, and then it leads you through a link to download a PDF view of the thesaurus. And if you're serious about using it, we could send you an XML version of it as well. The INSPEC thesaurus, there's information about that. And again, you may not be engineering specific in your disciplines, but it's just neat to see how a very mature thesaurus is handled and built and maintained. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the NISO guidelines. Again, you may not want to build your own thesaurus, you may, but it's very interesting reading on just the general science of creating a controlled vocabulary. So I think that is my final point. How are we on time?
We're exactly on time.
Awesome, thanks. Thank you.
We have time for one or two quick questions before we break.
Yes. Yes, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how the assignment of terms and the tagging fits into your editorial and production workflow.
Okay, great. That's a great question. So we have we get content from a multitude of places, right? So we have believe it or not, in the middle of New Jersey, we have an in-house typesetting department for our journals, and then so the content is XMLized there and PDF there, and then put into what we call our digital asset management system. By the same token, we publish 1,300 conferences. We sponsor 1,300 conferences a year. We don't control the creation of that content. It comes from dozens of places, and they follow rules for metadata and PDF. That comes in, we parse the metadata, we check the PDF, and then put that into our digital asset management system. And then there's we have plugged in the machine-aided indexing software provided by Access Innovations that does the assignment of the terms, and the indexers then just quickly look at a small percentage of them. So we built that right into our digital asset management workflow system.
So it's all post-production of the actual
Yes, it is.
published version of the content.
Yes, it is. Yes. This stuff is ready to go out the door, within a couple of days when the terms are assigned.
Great. This gentleman in the back.
Gerry, you through a lot of effort to develop your own taxonomy, a lot of steps. When you were talking about it, you mentioned a couple of specific end-user-facing use cases, exposing the terms to users and links, and I think using them as a sort of one way of doing really Are there any other use cases, either in your sort of editorial workflow or end user facing use cases that you're using this for?
Yeah, we actually use it in the peer review assignment. So editors and assistant editors are able to. We're trying to assign high-level taxonomy terms to authors, right? So I don't know exactly how that mechanism works, but I know they're employing the thesaurus in that way. And that's the only other use of it that I'm aware of right now.
It almost sounded in your later slides like you were sort of transitioning away from this kind of taxonomy or thesaurus-driven approach to content organization.
No, I didn't mean to give that impression. I think we'll still, maintain the thesaurus and still use it, and probably use it if we decide to purchase any software to do further, deep tagging within the, within the articles. We'll use that software and the taxonomy together to do presumably a better, more accurate assignment of terms. But you raise a good question of, beyond that, what other values does a thesaurus bring? I'm sure we'll discover a few more.
All right, we have time for one more question, this gentleman here, and then afterwards, please save your questions and hold them for the round table that will follow Kathleen's after the break. Yes.
My name is Toshi. My question is, these days, kind of Google days searching. The users are familiar with only free keyword searching. And you mentioned about your the metadata indexing. And it looks to me that maybe 6 or 7 index field, right?
Yes.
So, which looks like a very thin metadata. So the end user can reach to their desired goal or endpoint. Is it possible for them to get there?
Well, we think so. We think the guided navigation is one tool that's we actually like to sell ourselves or sell the concept anyway that this is a much better way of finding content than going through Google Scholar, for example. Scholar doesn't really allow you to do that drill down where we're giving more exact drill down, and it remains to be seen whether or not it provides enough value for people to continue to pay for that. If we get into an open access world, right, and Google has access to all of our free text, and will people just use that interface, or will they continue to come to ours and see that guided navigation and thesaurus-driven discovery of value?
Is the search on full text too, though? Not just the keyword,
Yes.
not just the keywords, but the full text as
Yes,
well.
yes,
So you
yes.
have that backup.
Right.
All right. Well, it is 2 o'clock. Thank you, everyone, so far, and I'd like to thank our presenters,
Thank you.
Guillaume and Gerry.